No one in that gold-plated room imagined that a simple, careless calling of a name would trigger a collapse worth $900 million, yet tragedy always chooses the quietest moment to strike. And that night, inside Grand Lexington Hall, where wealth believed itself to be, the law arrogance unknowingly lit the fuse for a moral earthquake. Grand Lexington Hall glowed like a cathedral of the elite, where diamonds caught the crystal light and turned it into sharp silver beams that sliced through the air, stretched tight as violin strings. Deep red velvet walls swallowed sound, leaving only the featherlight whisper of a string quartet playing a famed serenade. Men in tuxedos held thin bourbon glasses. Women in couture gowns murmured about matters only the old money class imagined were important. They all believed they stood at the center of the universe until fate chose someone to test. At the far end of the room, Ariana Miles, 42 years old CEO of Meridian Capital, entered like a quiet shadow among a forest of glitter. Her black silk gown traced her slender frame, free of sequins or anything designed to draw attention, yet eyes drifted to her without conscious effort. Her short, cropped hair and tiny diamond earrings kept everything so minimal it was almost defiant. She did not try to shine, she let her capability do it for her. But Ariana chose the second row of tables, half hidden behind a burst of blooming Ecuadorian roses. She preferred to observe before allowing anyone to notice her presence. In places like this, being underestimated was a secret form of power, and she knew exactly how to wield it. In total contrast stood Madeline Whitford, 45-year-old heiress of the Whitford family and host of the gala. Her gold metallic gown clung to her like liquid metal, sending bright bursts of light across the ceiling with every step. Her blonde waves rose like a crown, her red lips marked with the confidence nourished by 3 generations of wealth. Madeline did not walk, she appeared, and every appearance made the atmosphere shift as if the air itself bowed. Yet beneath that glitter, Ariana sensed something clearly, the recklessness of someone who believed she would never pay a price. Madeline stepped onto the stage, gripping the microphone like a scepter. Her voice rang out soft but sharp as a finely honed blade. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we begin tonight's auction, I'd like to create a special moment, a small ritual to bless our prosperity." Light laughter rippled through the VIP tables, mostly those from her own social tier. When staff pushed out a towering 7-tier cake covered in white cream and intricate sugar flowers, the room gasped with admiration. Ariana frowned slightly. A ritual, a cake, a display of power. Her intuition whispered that harmless moments often conceal the deepest cuts. Madeline scanned the room, her gaze slicing like a laser searching for a target. She did not choose someone prominent. She sought someone easy to dominate. And then her eyes stopped, not accidentally, on Ariana. In that instant, Ariana saw clearly what Madeline had never tried to hide, the certainty of someone who believed no one would dare push back. "You there?" Madeline called out, pointing at Ariana, her boldness making the room tilt. "Come here for a moment." The air froze. Every gaze snapped to Ariana like metal to a magnet. But Ariana did not flinch, did not stumble, did not show a hint of confusion. She took a slow breath, set her wine glass down, and walked toward the stage. Her heels struck the floor in sharp, proud beats, the steps of a woman who knew her worth, yet did not mind letting others think otherwise. With each step toward the light, Ariana felt 2 emotions twist through the crowd, curiosity and anticipation. Some wondered who she was. Others waited for drama. and Madeline smiled, the satisfied smile of someone convinced she still controlled the board. What she did not know was that in that very moment, with just one small mistake, one sliver of arrogance, she was about to trigger a chain of dominoes powerful enough to topple the century-old empire her family had built. Ariana stopped before the stage, facing the giant cake, sparkling beneath the chandelier. To her, it was no symbol of prosperity. It was a warning, a reminder that the line between power and humiliation was as thin as a curled lip. Madeline, blind to the danger humming in the air, saw only an opportunity to flaunt her authority. The gala remained dazzling. The music flowed, champagne shimmered, but beneath the luxury fate had already chosen who would fall and who would rise. Ariana lifted her chin, her eyes holding a brief, unreadable chill, and that became the moment that opened the door to a $900 million disaster, born from a cake, a careless call, and the arrogance of someone who never understood that some people stay silent only because they are strong enough to shake the entire world. The 7-tier cake stood proudly at the center of the stage like a sugar-crafted throne, but in the next second it became a weapon no one expected, and a single reckless moment transformed the entire room into an arena where dignity was turned into entertainment. Madeline twisted her wrist lightly, the silver microphone glittering like a piece of jewelry used to command the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said in a voice so sweet it seemed ready to melt, yet underneath it hid a sharp needle. A good gala always needs a small ritual, a little blessing before the celebration. The crowd burst into approving laughter, some leaning forward so they would not miss a second of the unfolding performance. Madeline tilted her head, smiling the kind of smile people wear when they have spent a lifetime looking down on others, a smile born of blind confidence. Then she looked Ariana up and down, pausing a moment too long on the simple black gown. Our tradition, Madeline continued her tone, carrying the weight of someone lecturing a person she considered beneath her, is to choose one special guest to represent prosperity. The word special fell from her lips like an insult wrapped in sugar. Ariana stayed silent, her posture straight, her face unreadable, only her eyes shifting slightly, as if she had foreseen what was coming, but chose to face it with absolute calm. Her mind flickered with memories of other galas, where people nodded respectfully, only because they knew her name, not because they understood her worth. Tonight she stood before a room full of people who did not yet realize who they had just provoked. And sometimes ignorance is the most dangerous thing of all. "Come closer," Madeline said with syrupy sweetness, then suddenly placed a hand on Ariana's shoulder, as if guiding a child onto a stage. Ariana did not pull away. She stood still, her expression unshaken, though her heartbeat slowed each pulse, heavy, like distant drums echoing in her chest. Spotlights hit the two of them. The entire room held its breath for a split second. Then Madeline leaned in with a look of mock intimacy, her eyes sparking with the mischief of someone about to put on a show. Every party, Madeline said, her voice dropping halfway, but intentionally clear in the microphone, needs a little drama. And then she shoved. No warning, no hesitation, not a flicker of doubt. The massive cake toppled forward like an avalanche. A sharp crack resounded as the top of the cake slammed directly into Ariana's face. In that instant, the room erupted with screams, then laughter, then the rapid-fire burst of camera shutters flashing like a storm of blinding light. Butter, cream, sugar, everything exploded into a thick white chaos across Ariana's hair, skin, and gown. A heavy layer of frosting plastered her eyes, sliding down her cheeks and neck, clinging as though trying to choke the breath from her. The crowd roared with laughter, some clutching their stomachs, others raising their phones high as if they had captured a priceless moment for social media. Madeline's smile widened with triumphant delight. She threw her head back and laughed loudly. "Oh, come on," she said, coating her tone with fake sympathy. "It's just a little cake. If you get tense before dinner, it's ridiculous." Scattered applause broke out. A few whistles. Cruelty spreads like a virus, especially when it is disguised as entertainment. But in the middle of that storm, Ariana didn't do what anyone else might have done. She didn't scream, she did not cry, she did not run. She lifted her hand and gently wiped the cream from her eyelashes, the slow, calm gesture making the cruelty look naked and foolish. She stood at tall shoulders, firm, her breathing steady. Her face was covered in frosting, yet her eyes shone clear cold and deep like winter water. The silence she created was sharp enough to split the air. Laughter died. Whispers began to ripple like needles through fabric. A man near the bar whispered, "Wait, is that Ariana Miles?" A silver-haired woman clutched her pearl necklace, her voice trembling as she whispered, her face draining of color. "She is the CEO of Meridian Capital, the one controlling the $900 million funding for this foundation." Eyes widened in terror. The people who laughed the loudest were the first to drop their gazes. Phones buzzed in pockets, messages, alerts, internal warnings. And then Ariana simply turned, handed a napkin to the flustered server, and walked off the stage with a calmness so controlled the mockery instantly transformed into shame. In Madeline's mind, her confidence still thrived. She had no idea what she had just done. She did not understand that one act of cruelty in front of someone she underestimated could become a catastrophe before the person who held the power to destroy the very empire she flaunted. But Ariana understood. She felt the shift in the air, the reversal in the room's energy, the fear creeping through every corner. And amid the fading camera clicks, a truth rose within her. Not the sting of humiliation, but the power of silence. Silence can ruin reputations. Silence can stop the flow of money. Silence can burn down an empire without raising a voice. Ariana returned to her seat, placed her glass of water on the table, and that moment, when every eye in the room fixed on her, became the instant history began writing itself, not with a shout, but with the absolute composure of a woman who knew that when her moment to strike arrived, no one would remain standing. The napkin Ariana placed back on the table seemed to carry the weight of the entire $900 million, because the moment she sat down, every gaze in that opulent room recoiled as if they had just witnessed something far beyond what they had expected. Light from the crystal chandeliers washed across her face, still streaked with smears of cake, yet her eyes burned, bright, calm, controlled, and laced with challenge. Not a challenge toward Madeline, not toward the people who had just laughed at her, but toward the entire power structure trembling around her. A server approached with shaky hands, offering her a fresh napkin, but Ariana only gave him a gentle smile so soft and kind, it nearly brought the young man to tears out of shame for the whole room. Meanwhile, on stage, Madeline still stood beneath the lights, her breath rising with the thrill of her supposed victory. She believed the humiliation she delivered had elevated the gala to its peak. She had no idea the gala was about to ascend to a level far beyond her control. Madeline lifted the microphone, preparing to add another joke, but the murmurs below began to rise rapidly. Is she really Ariana Miles? Oh my God. I just checked LinkedIn. It's her, the CEO of Meridian Capital. She controls nearly half of Whitford Foundation's operating funds. What on earth was Madeline thinking? The whispers fell like droplets onto a still lake, then swelled into rolling waves that spread across every table, every row, every group of guests who had been lounging comfortably as if watching a harmless luxury performance. A silver-haired man whose face usually radiated untouchable high society, calm, suddenly went pale. His fingers trembled as he checked his email. Then he let out a heavy breath when he saw messages from investors asking what was happening. That video is spreading, he muttered, nearly panicked. And then all at once, the familiar chime echoed from dozens of phones across the room. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, a flood of newly posted videos, sharp inhales, muted curses. No one dared look directly at Ariana, but everyone watched her through the corners of their eyes, desperate to gauge her reaction. Ariana, the direct opposite of the chaos circling her, sat calmly with her hands interlaced on the table. Her shoulders straight, her chin gently lifted, her gaze directed toward the stage, as if she were evaluating a performance unworthy of attention. Beneath that quiet exterior, her mind worked with the precision of a strategist born from brutal battlegrounds. She saw every shifting glance. She heard the quickened breathing of long-time donors. She sensed the rising panic among the guests in the front rows, the ones who believed themselves above all consequences. And above everything else, she felt one truth: the balance of power was cracking. On stage, Madeline still had not realized any of it. "Come on, everyone," she said, her voice high, brittle, pretending the room was overreacting. "We're having a beautiful evening." But no one laughed. No applause, no supportive nod. The silence after her words fell like a steel curtain. She frowned, unaccustomed to losing favor, unaccustomed to not being adored. But before she could speak again, a quiet voice rose from a table near the stage, soft yet loud enough for the entire room to hear. "You just humiliated the biggest donor this foundation has." No one knew who said it, but the words shot through the air like an arrow and struck Madeline straight in the chest. She froze, her eyes blinking rapidly as she scanned the room, trying to find one ally. There were none. The same people who laughed with her minutes earlier now turned away, their faces stone cold. They knew one thing well: standing with Madeline now was no different than standing under a burning building. Ariana lifted her water glass, bringing it to her lips with deliberate grace. That small gesture in a room stretched tight as wire suddenly became the center of gravity. It felt like the movement of a general surveying the battlefield, awaiting the perfect moment to command an attack. But Ariana did not want to attack. Not yet. A small part of her wanted to stand, to speak, to flip the room on its axis. But the stronger part chose silence, because she knew silence was a blade. Silence was not weakness. Silence was a message. And that message was already echoing across the room without her saying a word. In the corner, a wealthy couple looked at Ariana, then at each other, their eyes filled with regret. They remembered how they judged her when she entered, wondering which powerful guest she had snuck in with. Now they felt as small as the cowards standing at the edges of someone else's life, yet eager to judge it. A middle-aged donor pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her heartbeat. She thought of her own adopted daughter, a little girl of color, and felt a surge of self-loathing for not standing up when Ariana was humiliated. Meanwhile, on the right side of the room, a group of young staff tried to discreetly watch TikTok under the table. The video of Ariana being shoved into the cake had already reached nearly 60,000 views in only minutes. Remix audio had appeared. Captions were full of rage. CEO humiliated because no one knew who she was. Silence louder than any comeback, when true power doesn't need to prove itself. And Madeline? She stood on stage like someone who had lost the ground beneath her feet. Her hand gripped the microphone, and now everyone could see it, trembling. Her mouth opened to speak, but her throat was too dry to produce sound. She no longer commanded the room, no longer dictated anyone's emotions, no longer shaped the story. Power was leaving her body like air escaping a balloon, not loudly, but unmistakably. Ariana lifted her gaze, meeting Madeline's eyes for a brief second. There was no hatred there, no anger, only a calm so penetrating it made Madeline feel exposed to the bone. And that was what terrified her most, because she realized the woman she underestimated was the only person in the entire room who did not bow to her. In a place where power had always been defined by last names and generations of wealth, Ariana shattered every rule with nothing but silence. But that silence would not last much longer, because out there right now, social media was preparing to explode. And once it did, no one, not even Madeline, would be able to contain the fallout. Posts, videos, furious comments were gathering like a tidal wave. A tidal wave Madeline had created with her perfectly manicured hands and her arrogant smile. And Ariana, she simply waited. Not for someone to fall, but for the right moment to speak the words that would change the history of business media and power forever. Yet before she could speak, the entire world would speak for her first, and the shift in power had only just begun. The 15-second clip spread like a spark falling onto a field of dry grass, and once it ignited, it devoured everything around it, with a speed no one could outrun. 30 minutes after the cake incident, when Ariana had stepped away from the lights, and Madeline was still pretending she had everything under control, phones across the ballroom began vibrating non-stop, each ping sounding like a storm pounding at the door. Outside on TikTok, the hashtag CakeGate had already climbed to the top of the trending list. The clip had been trimmed, overlaid with the words, "When arrogance exposes itself," and what made it spread with terrifying speed was not the cake shove, but the moment Ariana stood motionless with frosting streaming down her chin and eyes glowing cold and steady, making viewers furious, awed, and heartbroken all at once. On Instagram, major news pages reposted the video as if racing the clock. The captions grew sharper and sharper: CEO publicly humiliated, and Madeline Whitford defeats the wealthy but loses to silence. In the comments beneath, hundreds of thousands vented their anger. She looked more powerful than everyone laughing at her. That silence gave me chills. This woman is not ordinary. Madeline just signed her own sentence. Within 1 hour, viewership passed 2 million. Meanwhile, inside the gala, the shift in atmosphere was so stark it could be felt in every breath. Guests who usually stood with straight shoulders and lifted chins now bowed over their phones as if confessing guilt. Major donors avoided each other's eyes. Those who laughed earlier now sat frozen. A handful approached Ariana, intending to apologize, but when her calm gaze met theirs, they stepped back as though facing someone holding their fate in the palm of her hand. A salt-and-pepper-haired man owner of a major financial conglomerate whispered to his wife, "If this video escapes the industry, Whitford Foundation is in massive trouble." His wife swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "Not will be," Already is. On stage, Madeleine tried to lift the microphone, but her breath was no longer steady. Her eyes darted in search of allies, but instead of admiration, she met cold distance. A deep, icy distance. The silence after cruelty is the most terrifying kind, because it is no longer complicity. It is punishment. Through all of this, Ariana remained still, her lips gently pressed into a soft line. Outside, the storm was forming. Inside, the room had become its eye. And she knew this moment would be remembered for decades. As proof of a brutal rule, the cruelest acts are often disguised as jokes, but a single camera in the hand of a witness can topple an empire. On Twitter, CEOs, politicians, and celebrities joined the conversation. A Grammy-winning singer wrote, "Ariana Miles didn't need to say a word. Her eyes spoke everything." A legendary former basketball star tweeted a line that gained nearly 1 million likes in 4 hours. True class is standing in the storm without wavering. A best-selling author shared a photo of Ariana wiping frosting from her face with the caption, "The most expensive silence of the year." News outlets exploded. BBC, CNN, Bloomberg, Washington Post all simultaneously released stories on the public humiliation at New York's elite gala. Many went deeper, dissecting power dynamics, class, prejudice, civility, and the price of arrogance. Somewhere in the room, Ariana could feel the shift in power taking root, not through shouting, not through action, but through the fear settling into the hearts of those who once believed themselves above her, now terrified of the name they had just learned, Ariana Miles, the CEO, overseeing $900 million in funding. Meanwhile, Madeleine began to panic. Sweat seeped through her thick makeup. She saw fund managers, executives, and board members whispering urgently. Their anxious looks targeted her like lasers. She felt the pillars she relied on trembling beneath her feet. She shouted into the microphone, her voice shaking like a torn string, "Stop exaggerating. It was just a joke, just a little joke." That sentence became her second fatal mistake. The clip was cut down to only that line and spread across social media under the caption, "When someone thinks humiliation is a joke." Soft hisses rose from every corner of the room. The crowd no longer hid their disgust. A long-time donor stood up, pulled his wife along, and walked out without looking back. Others left as well, their faces dark. Media crews outside had caught wind of the scandal and were gathering, smelling blood. Ariana noticed every shift, but didn't react. She didn't want revenge. She didn't need to say a single word to destroy Madeleine. She only needed to let the truth step into the light. And it was doing exactly that. As the night neared its end, Madeleine fought to stand tall, to act confident, to continue the program with mechanical determination. But everything was cracked. The remaining guests were only waiting for an excuse to leave. Right before the final auction item, nearly 10 phones lit up with the same alert from Financial Watch leaked video, Whitford Foundation chair, humiliates Meridian Capital CEO. Risk of losing $900 million in funding. The room burst into panicked whispers. Ariana closed her eyes for 1 second. Not out of exhaustion, but because she knew this was more than the collapse of a gala. It was the beginning of a chain reaction. When she opened her eyes again, Madeleine was no longer in control of the room. Her power melted like sugar meeting water. And Ariana, she didn't have to lift a finger. The world was already doing it for her. The storm had arrived, and everything was only just beginning. The gala seemed to have ended, but in truth, it was only the prelude to an earthquake quietly cracking beneath the marble floors of Grand Lexington Hall As the last guests slipped out of the ballroom, like ghosts avoiding disaster elsewhere in New York's glass towers, emails, messages, and calls began stacking into a web of panic, unlike anything that the city's philanthropic circles had seen. The system Madeline depended on the banks, the support funds the corporations tied to her for 30 years, began to shake. Not because of the cake, not because of the humiliation, but because the name Ariana Miles now appeared alongside the number $900 million in hundreds of articles and posts being shared at a frantic pace across social media. Within 2 hours of the gala, Whitford Foundation's financial management team received more than 80 emails from partner banks asking for confirmation. Will the Meridian Capital grant be affected? Is there a risk of withdrawal? Do we need to activate the financial protection clause? Those words affected risk withdrawal appeared for the first time in any message related to Whitford Foundation, a fund once considered so stable it was practically a monument in New York high society. But tonight, that monument began to crack. On the 35th floor of Whitford headquarters, an emergency meeting took place just past midnight. Board members sat around the long walnut table, their expressions so grave the sound of their dry swallows seemed audible. "The video is spreading too fast," said Linda Marwood, the chief executive officer, gripping her documents tightly. "We have lost control of the narrative. Right now, the public is questioning the entire internal culture of this foundation." "Not just the public," another member spoke up, anxiety thick in his voice. "I just saw a message from Union Bank. They want to know if our credit terms are still secure in the event Meridian Capital pulls funding." Pulls, a third person, gasped. "Are they actually saying that?" The second member nodded, face pale. "Not yet. But they want confirmation. And that alone is a very bad sign." Silence fell over the room like a death sentence. A truth dawned on all of them. Since the foundation was created, no one had ever questioned its financial stability. But a single action from Madeline had ignited a cyclone of doubt. And Madeline herself. She was not at the meeting. She was in her penthouse on the 46th floor, standing before a mirror, removing her curls and makeup as if she could peel away the events of the night. But the more she removed, the tighter the truth clung to her. In the reflection was not a face of pride, but a woman gripped by a growing fear. "Impossible," she whispered. "It was just a joke. People cannot react like this to a joke." But then her phone lit up constantly, each notification slicing another piece off her fragile denial. A message from her communications advisor. "We need an emergency meeting." A message from the legal team. "You should avoid public appearances." A message from a close donor. "The video is spreading across Europe." A message from her mother. "What happened, Madeline?" But the one that made her hands tremble was the email from the chairman of the board, short and sharp, like a strike to the chest. "We need to talk. First thing tomorrow." Meanwhile, Oriana sat in her Tribeca townhouse, streetlights, casting long golden streaks across the wooden floor. Marcus, her younger brother and trusted financial advisor, leaned against the wall as his phone rang non-stop. "Ariana, CNN is calling. BBC too. Bloomberg is, do not answer," Ariana said softly, but with absolute finality. Marcus looked at her, still calm, still silent, still entirely unaffected by the chaos consuming global media. "What will you say when you do speak?" he asked. Ariana set her teacup down and looked into the distance, as if seeing through the city's horizon. "Nothing," she replied. "The world is not ready to hear." Let them understand on their own. Silence once again became Ariana's weapon, a weapon Madeline could not counter, because the desperation of the weak always reveals itself when confronted by the calm of the strong. By morning, every major news outlet carried the same headline: Ariana Miles, the woman silent in the storm. Why the silence of a CEO is shaking investment funds worldwide. Is Whitford Foundation facing the biggest crisis in its history? On LinkedIn, thousands shared the clip, accompanied by professional analyses. This is not personal insult. This is leadership failure, a clear example of the cost of bias and arrogance in corporate environments. A masterclass in soft power and emotional control. At Whitford Foundation headquarters, the emergency meeting dragged on without end. A European bank withdrew its funding pledge. A museum cancelled a planned exhibition collaboration. A major corporation removed its name from next year's event. These losses were not just numbers. They were signs that Whitford Foundation's reputation was plummeting from a glass tower into an abyss, all because of one moment in front of a camera. A board member slammed his fist on the table. What was Madeline thinking? We trusted her. But Linda shook her head. It is not about what Madeline did. It is about who she did it to. The room fell into a heavy silence, a silence that signaled a second earthquake was coming. Elsewhere in the city, Ariana received another alert. Financial Times requests exclusive interview. But she only smiled, shaking her head. For Ariana, this was not the time to strike. It was the time to observe, to watch the system Madeline built, through connections, through wealth, through arrogance, collapse piece by piece. Because real collapse rarely comes from attack. It comes from self-destruction. And Whitford Foundation began self-destructing the moment Madeline touched that cake. No one yet knew that in the days to come, this earthquake would sweep away not only Madeline's reputation, but the entire power structure she once relied on to rule New York high society. And Ariana, she had taken only one step. The game had barely begun. 3 days after the explosive gala, while the social media storm refused to die down, and the press continued tearing Madeline Whitford's name apart on every platform, a private donor gathering was held at the Kingsbury Manor Hotel. Officially, it was meant to ease the tension, but in truth, it was a desperate attempt to salvage the last fragile threads holding Whitford Foundation together. Expensive suits, glasses of deep red wine, tense whispers, and darting eyes filled the room, as if everyone present knew they were standing on thinning ice that could crack beneath them at any moment. When Madeline entered the reception hall with a strained smile and a pale blue evening gown, she tried to perform confidence, as though everything was slowly returning to normal. But no one was fooled. The smiles she received were faint and forced, the kind of smiles people give when shaking hands with someone whose presence alone could cost them tens of millions of dollars. Madeline kept stretching her lips into the smile of a powerful hostess, but her palms were slick with sweat. She believed this event would be her chance to regain control. She believed that simply showing up leaning on charm and diplomacy would pull everything back into place. All of those beliefs collapsed in 3 seconds, because when Madeline turned to raise her glass in greeting, her eyes collided with a figure she never imagined she would see at such an exclusive gathering. At the far end of the room, beneath the warm golden lights, reflecting off a flawlessly tailored navy suit, stood Ariana Miles, elegant, composed, silent yet commanding the entire atmosphere. When the room registered Ariana's presence, conversations fell apart piece by piece, like velvet drapes being ripped from their hooks. Silence spread quickly heavily, as though everyone understood they were about to witness a moment that would be remembered for decades. Ariana made no move to blend in, no attempt to mingle, no need to assert herself. She simply stood there with the stillness of a mountain, and that stillness sent hundreds of hearts racing. Madeline felt her throat tighten as though someone were squeezing the air from her lungs. She never expected Ariana to show up here, and her presence unannounced, unceremonious, and without flourish, carried more force than any speech ever could. Swallowing panic forcing her voice steady, Madeline lifted her wine and spoke loudly. "Ariana, I'm so glad you came. I hope you've recovered after the other night." The other night. A brutally dismissive way to describe an act of humiliation the entire world was furious about. Dozens of eyes snapped toward Ariana, waiting for her response. Ariana stepped forward, once set her glass on a nearby table, then walked directly toward Madeline. Each movement was deliberate, controlled, as if she wanted the entire room to feel the shifting pressure in the air. When she was only an arm's length away, Ariana stopped. The room descended into complete silence. No music, no clinking glasses, only the sound of heartbeats and the heavy breathing of those watching. Ariana met Madeleine's eyes, and when she spoke, her calm voice sliced through the room like a blade sliding across silk. "I do not consider humiliation a small incident, Madeline." Madeline went pale. A soft gasp rose from the corner of the room. "Dear God," Ariana continued, her voice steady and sharp, "and I do not mistake cruelty for tradition." Several guests nearly dropped their wine glasses. The words themselves were simple, clear, but spoken in a tone so cold and precise it cut deeper than any shout ever could. Madeline forced a laugh, trying desperately to shrink the moment. "Ariana, you're overreacting." "I was only Ariana," interrupted her calm, as if she had rehearsed this line her entire life. $900 million is never a small matter. The room jolted, as if struck by lightning. A donor standing behind Madeline froze mid-breath. An elderly man almost dropped his champagne. Everyone heard it. Everyone understood. Madeline was speechless. Her face flushed red, her lips trembled, her eyes locked onto Ariana as if staring at a signed death warrant. Ariana said nothing more. She turned and walked out of the room, leaving behind a silence so heavy it sounded like an empire cracking down the middle. The moment the doors closed behind her, whispers ignited like flames, hitting oil. 900 million. She's the biggest donor of the foundation. Madeline is finished. She destroyed her entire career with her own hands. That wasn't a warning. That was a declaration. In a corner, a major donor immediately phoned his lawyer. 2 others left the event without saying goodbye. Several quietly removed Madeline from their priority contact lists. Worse yet, someone leaked the entire exchange to the press before the night even ended. The tip reached Financial Times within minutes. Ariana Miles subtly confirms that $900 million in funding may be at risk. And just like that, with a nearly whispered sentence, Ariana placed the first definitive mark on the downfall of Whitford Foundation. But what made the room shiver wasn't the money. It was her absolute calm. A calm every person who has ever harmed someone fears most. Because people who lose their temper are dangerous. But people who stay calm, they never strike with noise. They strike with silence. And that silence from this moment on became the force dragging Whitford Foundation into a nightmare with no exit. No one in the room realized that Ariana had only just begun, and Madeline, though surrounded by hundreds of people, had officially become the loneliest person in New York. From the moment Ariana left the private gathering, the room behind her felt as though it had been pulled into a colorless vortex of pressure, where every breath and every glance condensed into an invisible fear no one dared to name. Ariana's presence had not only stripped Madeline of her dignity, it marked the moment every major donor realized they were standing on the thin border between stability and an unseen collapse spreading from the first cracks. When the event ended, donors slipped out in small, silent, hurried groups, as if they had just witnessed a fire creeping toward the very door they were closest to. No one said goodbye to Madeline. No one met her eyes. That cold indifference was more brutal than criticism, because it carried a truth Madeline was about to face. No one wanted to sink with a ship already taking on water. When Madeline returned to her penthouse, she slammed the door shut, as if trying to keep the collapsing world outside from flooding in. She tried to convince herself that everything could still be salvaged, but her phone kept ringing with alerts from journalists' communications advisors, and worst of all, the board. An emergency meeting was scheduled for 8 the next morning. She dropped onto the sofa, feeling as though even the floor beneath her was trembling. It was not real trembling, but the invisible collapse of the power she had relied on for far too long. Meanwhile, Ariana was preparing for the next day in the exact opposite way, calm, silent, and sharp, like an arrow fully drawn, waiting only for the right moment to be released. Marcus opened his laptop numbers from analysts lighting up the screen with projections of what would happen if Ariana truly withdrew funding. Red lines stretched across the reports like blood streaks. "They're really panicking," Marcus said, astonished. "One sentence from you and the entire philanthropy sector is scrambling. Dozens of foundations are reviewing their policies, and Whitford Foundation, they're basically paralyzed." Ariana sipped her tea, eyes fixed on the skyline outside the window. "They aren't panicking because of me," she said quietly. "They're panicking because of the truth." Marcus exhaled, nodding. "Exactly. The truth is, they never imagined power could shift sides. And now it has." The next morning, just as the first rays of sunlight touched Manhattan's glass towers, the conference room on Whitford Foundation's 35th floor was already lit. Pale, tense faces sat around the long table, no one calm enough to even sip the coffee in front of them. Madeline walked in wearing a white blazer, stripped of her usual confidence. As the eyes around the room bore into her, she felt every heartbeat like a hammer strike. Before she could sit down, Linda, the chief financial officer, slammed a thick stack of reports onto the table. They landed with the weight of a verdict. "We need to discuss the consequences of what you've done," Linda said, her voice cold as steel. "The $900 million in funding is at risk. 2 major donors have withdrawn commitments. A European bank has paused disbursement. A tech corporation has cancelled their partnership for next year's event." Madeline tried to steady her trembling voice. "I told you Ariana is overreacting. It was just a joke." Linda shot her a look sharp enough to cut stone. "You humiliated the woman who controls half of our operating capital in front of hundreds of witnesses. No one considers that a joke." Another member slammed his hand on the table. "For God's sake, Madeline, do you even realize that video has reached 35 million views? 35 million! And that's not counting remix edits, analytical articles, or the commentary from financial sectors. People are treating you as the symbol of blind arrogance," a third added. "And what's worse, Ariana still hasn't spoken. Her silence is killing us. Madeline froze. She knew it. She could feel the tick of the countdown bomb Ariana left in that private event. But she still wasn't ready to admit the truth. Ariana, the woman she once dismissed as insignificant, now held the entire fate of the foundation in her hands. Linda opened her laptop and projected an email onto the large screen. Here she said, "The latest message from Meridian Capital. They've updated one single line on their website footer. All partners must meet standards of respect and equality." The room turned to ice. Someone whispered, "That's a warning." Another replied, "No. That's a strategic declaration." Madeline gripped the chair back. She wouldn't dare pull out. Linda met her gaze without a shred of sympathy. "Madeline, do you really think Ariana needs us?" "She doesn't. But we cannot survive without that 900 million. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating, as if oxygen itself had been removed. Then a small but razor-sharp voice pierced the space. "I propose Madeline resign." It was Raymond, the eldest board member, once the most loyal patron of the Whitford family. His words stopped every breath in the room. Madeline shot up. "You can't, I can," he cut in. "Because you no longer have leadership ability. You no longer have trust. And you no longer have power. We cannot let the foundation die with you." In that moment, Madeline saw her life slipping from her grasp like water falling onto marble. No power, no voice, no allies, and no one willing to stand beside her. Even the Whitford name, once her proud inheritance, had become a burden people now wanted to distance themselves from. When the meeting ended, Madeline walked down the hallway like a sleepwalker. Outside the glass walls, New York was still bright, still loud, still indifferent to the fear eating away at her. But when she saw the latest headline, "Whitford Foundation falters after Gala scandal," Ariana Miles remained silent. Her legs nearly gave out, because she knew, even if no one said it aloud, that the collapse she was facing was not the end. It was just the tip of the iceberg, and the rest, the deeper, colder mass beneath, was waiting for Ariana to reach out and touch it. Just one move, one announcement, one sentence, and Whitford Foundation would fall into a bottomless void. Ariana knew it. The board knew it. New York knew it. Only Madeline still refused to believe it. But truth doesn't need her belief to exist. And the truth was, this power had abandoned her. Forever. Rumors that Ariana would make her first public appearance since the humiliation spread like fire touching oil, making the entire city of New York hold its breath. When Meridian Capital announced an urgent and decisive press conference, major news outlets around the world immediately shifted focus. Financial boardrooms switched on their screens, and business schools paused their lectures so students could watch live. The glass tower of Meridian lit up like a pyramid, sending a signal into the sky. Television vans crowded the street, fighting for space to set up equipment. Journalists in pressed suits gripped their microphones, eyes sharpened by the knowledge that they were about to witness not just news, but history. When Ariana stepped out of the elevator in the lobby, time seemed to contract into a single flawless line. She wore a white suit, simple yet sharp as the cut of a surgical blade. Her face was serene, with no heavy makeup, no flashy jewelry, only bright, cold eyes, the eyes of someone who had looked straight through humiliation and walked out the other side as a victor long before the battle even began. The elevator doors opened, and a wave of shutters exploded into rapid-fire clicks, sounding like fireworks at a parade. No journalist dared to shove forward. No one shouted out questions, because what stood before them was not a victim. It was a woman about to deliver a verdict upon an entire system. Ariana stepped onto the stage. She did not bow. She did not offer a polite smile. She simply stood there, straight-backed, one hand lightly resting on the podium. Silence enveloped the room, like the charged air before the first thunderstrike of a storm. "Good morning," Ariana said, her voice steady, unshaken. "I am here today to talk about respect." One short sentence, yet it made the entire hall forget to breathe. "In the past 3 weeks," she continued, "I have been asked countless times whether my silence meant weakness or fear." She lifted her chin, her face illuminated by the stage lights. I remained silent, not because I was weak, but because the world needed to see the truth without my voice getting in the way. Reporters' pencils trembled against their notepads. "The truth is," Ariana said, lowering her tone, but sharpening it like steel, "what happened at the Whitford Foundation Gala was not simply a personal insult. It was an attitude that dismissed human dignity, dismissed people, and dismissed the very values a charitable organization claims to represent." She paused a brief moment, but heavy enough to encase the room in glass. "And for those reasons, I am announcing immediately, Meridian Capital will withdraw the full $900 million in funding from Whitford Foundation." A loud wave of gasps swept across the hall. Several reporters shot to their feet. Others nearly dropped their cameras. It was the kind of moment the financial world would replay for decades just to feel its impact again. "This decision is not personal," Ariana continued, her voice unwavering despite the shock rippling through the room. "It is structural. No organization can stand when its leadership does not respect the people who sustain its values." She placed the file neatly on the podium. "We will redirect this funding to other organizations, ones that treat human dignity as a requirement, not an option." Dozens of reporters raised their hands, but Ariana did not answer a single question. She stepped back from the podium, leaving the room to erupt in a storm of camera flashes, frantic discussions, and stunned shouting. This withdrawal was a blade placed at the most vulnerable artery of Whitford Foundation's finances. Within 12 minutes of Ariana leaving the stage, the market reacted like a wounded creature. Stocks of companies associated with Whitford Foundation plunged. A European bank declared that Whitford Foundation was at risk of insolvency. A Canadian charity announced it was pulling out of all partnerships. Donors who had supported Madeleine for years gathered for an emergency meeting, treating it like a hospital corridor outside an operating room. Worst of all, a foreign equity fund announced the complete withdrawal of its capital within 2 hours of the press conference. Meanwhile, Madeleine Whitford sat in her office, pale and trembling, replaying the video of Ariana's announcement. No, this can't," she whispered like someone lost at sea. But everything had slipped out of her control long ago. As reporters gathered outside the Whitford headquarters, they hurled questions at her. "Mrs. Whitford, did you know about the decision beforehand? Do you have any comment? Do you believe you should resign?" Madeleine said nothing. She merely stood there, looking like the crumbling remnant of an era that had already ended. Inside the board assembled again, and this time no one asked, "What if she withdraws?" The new question was, how do we survive this? But deep down, everyone knew survival was impossible. One member spoke bluntly. "No organization in this country can survive a $900 million withdrawal in a single day." Another added, We built an empire using Ariana Miles's money without realizing she was always the one holding the real power. The final truth was exposed like an open wound. Whitford Foundation had never truly been powerful. The power was Ariana's. They had only borrowed it. And now she had taken it back. In her quiet Tribeca home, Ariana watched the headlines rolling across the television screen. Whitford Foundation on the brink of collapse. Major donor withdraws funding non-profit sector shaken. Ariana Miles becomes the face of the Respect First movement. Marcus stood beside her, eyes fixed on the screen. You did something no one has ever done. Ariana rested her hand on her herbal tea. This wasn't to destroy, she said softly. It was to remind them that arrogance has a cost. She gazed out the window, the sunset pouring gold across the buildings. They thought what they built was unshakable. Ariana closed her eyes for one breath, then opened them with a gaze sharp as a blade. But if it's built on disrespect, it's nothing but a sandcastle. That night, as the world continued to dissect the $900 million speech, an irreversible truth etched itself into history. Ariana did not just withdraw funding. She withdrew power from the hands of someone unworthy. And when power leaves a person, it never returns. At that moment, Madeline Whitford was not merely defeated. She had become a living warning for an entire system, and Ariana had only just begun. Within hours of the explosive press conference, the collapse of Whitford Foundation was no longer a prediction. It became a chain reaction, detonating at a vertical freefall. In just 2 days, the pillars that once kept the foundation alive, the international donor network, political alliances, the centuries-old Whitford name, shattered simultaneously, like glass struck at its weakest point. Madeline Whitford, once a dazzling presence on fashion magazines' Forbes covers and million-dollar galas, now had only one thing left, the fear of being swallowed by the very darkness she never imagined she helped create. She sat motionless in her office, once the power center of the foundation, watching the news flooding across 3 large screens. Every headline glowed red like an open wound. Whitford Foundation insolvent partners withdraw after historic funding. Cut former employees. Expose toxic culture. Madeline Whitford pressured to resign. Each headline sliced through the armor of confidence she had worn for years. No one on the board spoke to her with civility anymore. No one defended her. No one believed her excuse of just a joke. Those who once toasted to her at galas now avoided her like an outbreak. When Madeline opened her email, the first thing that confronted her was a resignation letter, prepared for her signature, accompanied by a cold final note. This is the only option left to save what remains. But what remained to save 7 international investment funds had withdrawn capital. 2 banks froze the foundation's accounts pending audits. Art institutions removed the Whitford name from their golden plaques. Dozens of employees submitted resignations. Longtime family acquaintances sent condolences disguised as polite distance, wishing you strength during this difficult time. Elsewhere, the New York State Attorney's Office initiated an investigation into the foundation for mismanagement and financial misconduct. Leaked emails from former employees accused Madeline of humiliating subordinates, being too arrogant to listen to experts, and looking down on anyone outside her social class. And worse, a private dinner recording leaked. Madeline's voice mocking, dripping with disdain. People like her only get invited to those galas by luck. Better luck than winning the lottery. That audio clip spread almost as fast as the cake video. And just like that, public opinion reached its verdict without the need for trial, Madeleine was not wrong once she was wrong in her character. Meanwhile, Ariana said nothing, but her silence had never held more power. The media painted her as the shadow force, the woman who shook the system, with one decision, the symbol of a new era of respect and accountability. At Whitford Foundation, the final board meeting to decide Madeleine's fate was rushed and chaotic. The eyes of every member avoided hers, knowing this was not a choice, it was an obligation. Raymond spoke first, blunt and merciless. "You destroyed the reputation of this foundation with your own arrogance, and now you must leave." His words made Madeleine's ears ring. She gripped the edge of the table to keep herself from collapsing. Worse than being removed was realizing no one saw her as part of the future anymore. Whitford Foundation was no longer her home. It had become a burning ship, and everyone else was running from the flames except her. When she walked out of the building, reporters swarmed her, their flashes striking her face like arrows of light. "Mrs. Whitford, do you have anything to say to the public? Do you admit you insulted Ariana Miles? Do you believe you are responsible for the collapse of the foundation?" Each question slammed into her chest like stone. Madeleine lowered her head and walked like a fading shadow, stripped of the grandeur she once embodied. She stepped into a black car and slammed the door as if trying to shut out the world. But she couldn't. The story had traveled far beyond her reach. Her reputation had been burned to ash, and the deepest fear inside her was this: the world would not forget. In Tribeca, Ariana sat by her window, hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea, eyes quietly tracing the lights of the city. Marcus read the latest headline: "Tonight, Whitford Foundation files for bankruptcy protection." He turned to her, speaking softly. "Do you feel relieved?" Ariana shook her head gently. "No, because the goal was never to destroy them. The goal was to make them see what they had become." She set her cup down, her gaze deepening. And sometimes collapse is the only thing that brings truth to the surface. In that moment, a chapter closed. Not the chapter of a humiliation, but the chapter of an empire ruined by arrogance. And a new chapter one of renewal of a higher standard of dignity was ready to unfold with Ariana standing at the center like a guiding light. From the moment Whitford Foundation filed for bankruptcy and Madeleine Whitford vanished from public life, like a shadow erased from a grand painting, the world began asking one question: what will Ariana Miles do next with the $900 million she withdrew? But Ariana did not answer immediately. She did not appear on talk shows, did not post on social media, did not celebrate a victory. She never spoke a single word about Madeleine, nor did she mention the collapse of Whitford Foundation. And that very silence made her the center of an even larger societal shift. While the financial sector adjusted its standards and charitable organizations rewrote their codes of conduct, Ariana sat in her Lightwood office in Tribeca, reading letters sent from thousands of women around the world, women who had been dismissed, undervalued, pushed away from the table because they lacked the right last name or sufficient prestige. One letter made her pause, longer than the rest. "I watched your video. Not the moment you were humiliated, but the moment you stood up straight again, looked forward, and didn't shed a tear. You made me understand that dignity cannot be taken. It can only be challenged, so you can prove you deserve it." Ariana set the letter down and closed her eyes for a moment. It was these words, not the applause, not the market tremors, that gave meaning to what she had done. A week later, on a crisp autumn evening, Ariana appeared at an old hall in Harlem, once a historic train station, now restored into a community center. No red carpet, no crystal trophies, no flashing cameras, but inside were more than 3,000 people, students, entrepreneurs, donors, even international leaders, all rising to their feet when Ariana walked on stage. She wore an emerald gown, not glittering, but dignified like a fragment of deep forest placed in the heart of the city. When she stood before the microphone, the room fell so silent one could hear their own heartbeat. When I withdrew the $900 million, Ariana began her voice, low but clear. Many called it revenge. But I never did it for revenge. I did it to create opportunities for those who deserved to stand in the very places they had been denied. Applause erupted, but Ariana raised her hand, signaling them to stop. But opportunity cannot stand alone. It needs a system. It needs a home where it can grow, spread, and create real change. She looked directly at the crowd, and today I present that home, the Miles Institute for Equity and Leadership. Applause thundered like a storm. Ariana continued. This institute will not only offer scholarships or training programs. It will monitor, assess, and publish ratings on the level of dignity within every organization, from corporations, government agencies, to charitable foundations. If an organization fails to uphold human dignity, the world will know. The room shook with emotion. A young woman wiped tears. A business leader in the front row stood up and pledged $50 million on the spot. The news spread instantly, and within minutes, the hashtag Miles Institute topped global Twitter. Major corporations announced they would allow the institute to audit their internal culture, a move unheard of in history. Meanwhile, in her small rented apartment, Madeline Whitford watched the speech through an old laptop, her trembling hands gripping the edge of the table. No one mentioned her name. No one replayed the cake clip. No one saw her as the center of anything anymore. Ariana had taken the last thing she held on to attention. Madeline whispered, bitter but truthful. She turned me into nothing. But Ariana no longer thought about Madeline. She was looking forward to the belief that real change comes not from bringing one person down, but from lifting thousands up. In the months that followed, the Miles Institute became the new authoritative voice of the era. Governments used its reports to adjust policy. Corporations included dignity compliance scores in their annual statements. Universities built research programs based on Ariana's model. And the world began to understand that when a woman humiliated in public stands back up without screaming, without retaliating, using only her quiet composure to overturn an entire power structure, this is no personal act. This is the shift of an era. At the end of the speech, inaugurating the Miles Institute, Ariana said a single sentence that held the room in stunned silence before erupting into cheers. When someone tries to make you smaller, remember, small is only temporary. Dignity is the true shape of strength. And in that moment, Ariana Miles did not just reclaim her dignity. She redefined dignity for the entire world. From the perspective of an expert in power dynamics and system behavior, Ariana Miles's story reminds us of an eternal truth. The strongest institutions do not collapse because they run out of money. They collapse the moment they lose their foundation of respect. Real power does not live under spotlights or inside prestigious last names. It lives in the way one individual confronts injustice and forces the world to change, not through shouting but through composure. Ariana did not retaliate. she rewrote the rules. She did not destroy with force, she used principles. She did not seek revenge. With words, she built a new system that protects people before it protects reputations. If you believe respect must always come before privilege. Like this video to spread that message and subscribe to follow more stories that expose, heal, and rebuild. Comment with the phrase, "Honor your dignity," to remind each other that dignity cannot be taken. It only waits for the right moment to be reclaimed.